Hello and welcome to Dialogue. High-level representatives of 14 Palestinian factions, including rivals Fatah and Hamas, have reached an agreement to bury their divisions and form a consensus government. One outstanding achievement of the three-day reconciliation talks in Beijing is that Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, is the sole legitimate representative of all Palestinian people. How did the meeting come together? Can all the factions put aside their differences and cooperate as one? And how will this step help put an end to the decades-old Israel-Palestinian conflict? In the second half of our program, we'll take a look at the U.S. presidential election. Join us for our discussion today, live from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today are Professor John Gong from the University of International Business and Economics, Tahani Mustafa, Senior Palestine Analyst from the Crisis Group, and Anthony Moretti, Associate Professor from Robert Morris University. Welcome to Dialogue. Well, I start with... welcome. I will start with Tahani. Tahani, so 14 Palestinian factions, brought together and agreeing with each other on what's, a unity government and what's the next step for the Palestinian people. Itself, such a move is not easy. It's a hard one. Can we say that?
Absolutely. And this isn't the first conceptual reconciliation effort seen.
Seems there's a connection issue there. Let's turn to John. John, 14 factions. Previous similar accords usually is between Hamas and Fatah. Now you have more factions. You have often the issue is more difficult to agree upon anything.
Yeah, well, this is a great step in the right direction. I think this is the first step for a peace process in the sense that there got to be a unity among the Palestinian camp in order to be engaged in a meaningful negotiation with the Israeli side. And I think, at this point, the combination of the two major forces plus a couple of factions, smaller factions, I have to be very careful to emphasize that, which is the political wing of the Hamas and the Fatah, which essentially is ruling the West Bank right now. I think this represents a huge contribution to the peace process in the Middle East, and I think we should all be very proud that the government in China it takes the initiative to make that happen, to make it possible. I think the relevant parties at stake, they may have different opinions about this. Israel side has a different opinion about this. Washington has a different opinion about this. But at least I think the fact that multiple countries, important political forces in this process, for example, the European Union, many European countries, and even think the United States, they all sort of, at least welcome and not opposed to the current achievement. So I think this is a very important milestone, at least that the two sides that used to be actually at loggerheads at each other, even in violent ways, quite a few years ago, are finally reconciling with each other. They are the Palestinian brothers, I guess. So it's a good thing to see that finally they shake hands, and more importantly, they're shaking hands in Beijing.
Yes. So Tahani is back. Tahani, go ahead, please.
Well, this certainly is one of the most substantive deals that we've seen come to fruition in the last 17 years of this division. Now, in terms of prospects of this implementation, we'd have to be very cautious here because there are still substantive issues that haven't been ironed.
I think there's still the glitch is there. And so, Anthony, it's always good to see unity moves in a sense that, the parties will act as one in handling the other major party, of course, Israel. So that's an important step toward the direction of probably, easier to sort out the challenges, to overcome the problems.
No question. There's a saying that, again, rings true here, and that is that the open hand beats the closed fist. And, I think the timing of this is important for a couple of reasons. Number one, and John correctly mentioned the role of the United States going forward, and especially how long it has tried to be an actor, and critics would say perhaps not a impartial actor in the Middle East. But this announcement and this meeting and everything coming out of it takes place almost overlapping the exact time that the Israeli prime minister is going to be in the United States. And so the attention that he thought he was going to get to his message is now going to be blunted by a message that says, look, the Palestinians are united. They are ready to move forward. And I think the pressure is now going to be on the UN, the US, the EU to join hands with China and say, okay, let's bring this to whatever that next level is, to borrow a cliche. The one challenge is how much obstinance will Israel continue to have? We obviously can't answer that immediately, but there's no doubt tremendous enthusiasm coming out of what took place earlier this week.
Well, the agreement called Beijing Declaration, but the different Palestinian factions seems to be very popular in the international community. Let's take a look at the responses from different sides.
EU Special Representative for the Middle East peace process Sven Koopmans praised China's efforts in mediating the Palestinian factions, saying that China has an important role in reconciliation based on the two-state solution and a halt to violence. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif also welcomed the Beijing Declaration, stressing that, for long, the people of Palestine have seen nothing but pain and suffering. Today's agreement ignites hope that lasting peace can be achieved.
Palestinian unity, as we've said many a time, is crucial for peace and security and for advancing the aspirations of the Palestinian people for self-determination and for fully independent, democratic, contiguous, viable, and sovereign Palestinian state. I would also add that we, of course, that the Secretary General appreciates the efforts made by the People's Republic of China, as well as efforts of other countries involved in facilitating the process. We remain committed to working with all stakeholders towards a comprehensive resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Well, John, despite this consensus and agreement among different sections to work together as one, there's a lack of details or indications, in particular, the major faction, Hamas and Fatah, in what way they are going to iron out their differences, put aside their problems, and to join hands, working together. I mean, how big a challenge is that?
Well, it's still very much of a big challenge. I think mostly we're talking about the future governance of the Gaza Strip area. Now, I think the first obstacle is Washington. Washington's position is that the future Palestinian organization who is going to govern Gaza should have nothing to do with the Hamas side. Now, certainly, in the Beijing Declaration, Hamas is an important party to this. So I think, I want to emphasize very importantly, the phrase, the political wing of Hamas. This is very different from the military wing of Hamas. And I think this is a point that Beijing and other European Union side probably should be joining hands to try to convince Washington that is indeed a distinction here. We're not talking about the Hamas that's actually fighting this war. We're talking about the political side of Hamas. The second challenge, of course, is Israel itself. I think the peace process is totally impossible without any cooperation from Jerusalem, from the Israeli side. We've already seen Israelis' response to this. Associated Press reported that the Israeli side denounced this declaration just hours after it was signed. So I think Israel is not very happy about this, but I think there's still a hope of change. I think what I really mean by Israel is not very happy about this is really the Netanyahu administration. He has his own design for Gaza governance after this war, and I suspect that he would like to just see the Israeli Defense Force pretty much govern the Gaza Strip, very much the same model as being done in West Bank. Other than that, it's without a Palestinian cooperation side, which is the Fatah government in Ramallah. I think this is what Netanyahu has in his mind for the future design of Gaza Strip. I don't think this is acceptable to the international community. I think it's very clear that Gaza Strip is still Palestinian territory, and the two-state solution, including Gaza being part of the Palestinian state, should be the right way to go. So I think the challenge rests with Washington. The challenge rests with the Israeli side, and I think the international community should work together with China in pressuring Washington, in pressuring Israeli side to somehow come to the negotiating table for peace process in that area.
Well, let's leave that for another day. Anthony, if you look at the role played by China here, let's say similar agreements were signed, were reached before, and the sponsorship usually of regional powers, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, etc., but failed to be implemented. What do you make of China's efforts here, promoting intra-Palestinian reconciliation? Can China, do you think Beijing can help make a difference here?
One of the reasons I think China can is it comes to the Middle East conversation without all of the baggage that, at least on the Palestinian side, they're going to say, that Washington would bring to such a conversation. And so, John hit the nail on the head. There is so much lack of trust about what the U.S. might pursue. There certainly is an expectation that the Israelis will continue to be intransigent here. But what China brings to the conversation is a further example of a broader theme that has come up in so many other conversations. And that is that this is now a multipolar world. And it is not just Washington that has to set the international agenda, that has to define what peace agreements look like, that is often responsible for enforcing peace agreements, sometimes fairly, sometimes perhaps not fairly. China brings almost a neutral position here. And what I mean by that is there's no legacy. But more importantly, China has been very clear. The two-state solution is realistically the only solution that's going to work, and a unified Palestinian position advances those prospects.
Well, Anthony, before this recent reconciliation agreement, for consensus government within the Palestinians, last March saw Chinese efforts to bring Saudi Arabia and Iran together for rapprochement in terms of diplomacy. Are we seeing China establishing a profile of itself as a peacemaker, as a major factor contributing to peace in the region?
If we're seeing that, and I believe we are, I hope it continues. And what I mean by it, hope it continues, is it offers countries around the world, whether they are from the quote north or from the south, whatever part of the world, global north, global south, Middle East, whatever geographical designations we want to make. I think that the opportunity to see Beijing as a clear ally is going to be important. There's no question there was momentum for the conversations between the Saudis and the Iranians, and then things went awry because of some circumstances out of the control of both nations. But nevertheless, yes, I think there is now two key examples where China has played a critical role in two distinct parts of the Middle East to make it a calmer place, hopefully a calmer place, a place where there are more allies than enemies. And again, I go back to what I said earlier, that idea of the open hand beating the clenched fist.
Well, John, some would say, China is trying very hard to play a role for peace and stability, because peace and stability is the Chinese interest. If you look at this Belt and Road Initiative, for example, a community, for humanity with a shared future, for example. And also, for the first time since the conflict broke out, the Ukrainian foreign minister is in Beijing. What do you make of that?
Yeah, well, I think the one thing we need to point out is that China maintains good relationship with both the Israeli side as well as the Palestinian side. China in general is a large trading partner, if not the largest trading partner with most countries in the Middle East. So it generally wants to see a peaceful environment in that region. I think China's involvement is not so much motivated by geopolitical interests. China is not interested in instigating conflicts to support this party against that party. No, that's not our objective. I think our objective is to be friends to every party. China actually exports a lot of things to Israel market. We still keep pretty good relationship with the Israeli side. So I think Foreign Minister Wang Yi said something very clearly, that China's involvement in this is motivated by just the interest in pursuing justice, the interest in pursuing the moral objectives. It's not so much motivated by any sort of mercenary interests at all. Now, regarding, I think, the latter part of your question about the foreign minister of Ukraine to visit China, he's going to stay in Beijing for 4 days. And I suspect that they're talking about the second peace conference that President Zelensky once alluded to earlier when he was talking at the first peace conference. And I would emphasize the second peace conference would definitely involve the Russian side. The Russians will have to attend if the second peace conference is going to ever take place. And this is China's position as well. Now, the fact that he's going to stay here for 4 days, I suspect that definitely the topic of engaging the Russians to participate in the peace conference is an important objective. And furthermore, I would even speculate that it's probably even likely that the second peace conference is going to take place in Beijing. So if that's the case, even better.
Time will tell, what kind of role, how large a role China will play in bringing the parties together for a peaceful, solution for that conflict.